The biggest change I've made in the last 6 months is my fueling. I'm recovering better, I'm performing better on race day, and everything I use is in this box. So I'm going to take you through it in today's video, so sit back, relax, and let's talk all things running nutrition. So when it comes to running a marathon PB, fueling is such a huge part of that process, or for any PB for that matter. Now, whether it's your recovery from training or performing on race day, your fueling or your diet could be the difference between running a big PB or having a crappy race day. Now, in the last 6 months, I've seen my training and racing performances drastically improve. In fact, I've seen paces and race performances that I never thought possible. And I honestly think the biggest change that I've made has been to how I fuel and how I recover from my training. So I'm going to split this video up into 4 different sections. We've got supplements, pre, during and post-run nutrition. And this video is also going to include my nutrition and fueling plan for London Marathon, hence this massive piece of cardboard behind me. So sit back, relax, and yeah, let's go through all the things that I take in a week of training and racing. Now, the first section is supplements. Now, these are things that you can add to your diet if you think you're not quite getting enough through your food. Now, I would always try and take the food first approach, but when you're running and training a lot, sometimes that is difficult. Now, the main thing with that is taking a supplement doesn't change the fact you're deficient in it or you're not getting it through your food. It's a bit like using a puncture kit. Yes, you've repaired the puncture, kind of, but there's still a puncture underneath, if that makes sense. So I would always try and address any deficiencies in your food first, and then obviously if you can't get it in through your food, then use supplements. And I definitely use supplements as a better to be safe than sorry approach. Now, the first supplement I use is iron. Now, I use an iron biglycinate capsule every single morning. I also use an iron shot or iron infused water shot from a company called Spartone every single morning as well. Now, no companies or brands in this video have paid to be in this video. These are all just brands that I use every single day because I find they work and I enjoy what they're basically giving me as a consumer. And everything in this video was bought with my own money. Now, I would say iron is probably the most common thing for runners to be deficient in. You may have heard Jay Barraclough ran to Japan or Philly Bowden talk about their iron deficiencies, and it's super common. The main reason I think it's common is because of this kind of phenomenon called foot strike hemolysis, which is essentially where constant pounding on the floor breaks up those red blood cells and damages your red blood cells, or hemoglobin specifically. So then you require more iron to replace those, essentially. Now, then, it's not completely inconceivable to think that probably the more steps or the more mileage you're doing, it's more likely you're going to be deficient. Now, I haven't done a specific blood test for my iron or my ferritin levels, but I take it, as I said, as a better to be safe than sorry approach, because I don't want to end up with the side effects of being iron deficient. I don't want to be fatigued. I don't want my recovery and training to kind of take a hit. But then I also pair that iron supplement with a supplement called Ferrosorb. Now, this is from a company called Thorne, who are pretty expensive, but they seem to do good quality stuff. And Ferrosorb, hence the name, ferro as in ferritin, iron, and sorb as in absorb. It's full of B and C vitamins, which basically help me absorb that iron. I don't know too much about the physiology or science behind it, but I'm pretty sure without vitamin C you can't absorb iron properly. So either that's true or I've been conned into taking a supplement I don't need, but regardless, I'm going to carry on taking it because the placebo effect is good enough for me. Now, the next supplement I take is magnesium biglycinate. Now, as someone who has previously suffered with a stress fracture or any sort of bone related condition, magnesium is going to be something for you to potentially look at. It's absolutely fundamental in bone health, but the biggest thing that I take it for personally is my sleep. I find that when I take a scoop of magnesium biglycinate before I sleep every single day, I sleep so much better than if I don't. Now, again, that could be a placebo effect, but magnesium biglycinate has been proven to improve sleep. Now, there's different types of magnesium, so you've got biglycinate, I can't remember the other types, but they essentially do slightly different things. So it's the biglycinate that you want for kind of bone and sleep. So yeah, if you're not sleeping too well, which is obviously a super important part of your recovery, then it might be worth looking at magnesium biglycinate. The next supplement I take is creatine. Now, you may have heard of kind of weightlifters, bodybuilders, sprinters taking creatine. So you might be thinking, how does this benefit an endurance runner? So essentially, creatine is a really useful part of the body's energy system known as the ATP-PC energy pathway. Now, this energy pathway is super useful for kind of high explosive, quick energy production sort of sports, so sprinting, weightlifting, etc. Now, ATP-PC stands for adenosine triphosphate phosphocreatine. So obviously the C is the creatine part. However, majority of people will probably be deficient in creatine because it's actually quite hard to get into your diet. The most common things that include creatine are steak, red meat, etc. Now, the reason I take it as an endurance runner is because I love to race and I do a lot of racing and I do a lot of things that require kind of that kind of quick change of pace or that sharp hill, something that may require that quicker energy system, that ATP PC pathway. So if you're doing lots of racing where someone might quickly surge, or you're doing a course where there's some short, sharp hills that may potentially cause some problems for your legs, taking creatine may be beneficial for you. There are some downsides to taking creatine in terms of you do get a little bit of weight gain. For me, I've experienced about 500 grams to a kilo of water weight gain as that creatine is absorbed into the muscle, it takes water with it. So you may notice the weight on the scales go up, but I wouldn't stress about it, and it's not something that I've stressed about too much because I know it's water, and if anything, that water is going to aid my recovery because my muscles are more hydrated. Now, the next supplement I take is a male health supplement. This one is by a company called thsi. Again, don't know how good this company is particularly, but it seems to do the job. Over Christmas time, I discovered that my libido was pretty low, I was pretty tired, I was fatigued. So I did a private blood test for a company called Thriver Health, and it came back that my testosterone was low. Now, one way you can help to naturally boost your testosterone as a male is by taking zinc and eating red meat, gaining muscle, etc. Now, gaining muscle for me is not an option because I don't really want to get too much more muscly when it comes to like long distance running, and I don't eat too much red meat when it comes to things like steak. So zinc was the next best option for me. So I take a male health supplement that's meant to help my male health, as I said, while I try and get that sorted with my GP. But testosterone deficiency is quite a common thing in endurance athletes, so runners, cyclists, etc. Purely because your body fat is extremely low, your muscle mass is pretty low, it's mostly kind of lean muscle mass, and also your energy expenditure is extremely high, so then it kind of correlates with things like RED-S, etc. So definitely something to look at if you are experiencing kind of low mood, fatigue, low libido. It's definitely something I would worth kind of looking into because I definitely feel better since I've looked into it. And the final supplement that I use in a week of training or racing is electrolytes. Now, pretty much everyone I know takes electrolytes. Salts, specifically sodium, potassium, magnesium, chloride, etc. Essentially the things that you lose when you sweat during exercise. Now, the amount you may need to take will differ depending on your sweat rate. Now, you can get a sweat test done, but it's quite expensive. The average sweat loss per person is generally between 350 milligrams of sodium to 1800 milligrams of sodium. So that's quite a wide kind of range of sodium loss. So you're gonna have to kind of gauge it based off of what you kind of think you are sweat-wise, if that makes sense. Now, a good way you can kind of test how much fluid or kind of sweat you're losing in a run is if you weigh yourself completely naked before the run and then weigh yourself completely naked after the run, obviously accounting for any fluid taken on during the run, then you can kind of gauge how much fluid you're losing. Yeah, I personally don't think I sweat too much, so I just have one of these in the morning with my breakfast, with my coffee, just to kind of start the day off right and get that kind of rehydration going. So moving on to pre-run fueling. So this includes things like a carb load. So what is my carb load going to look like leading into the marathon? So generally it's recommended during a carb load that you're trying to take on somewhere between 7 and 12 grams of carbohydrate per kilo of body weight. So for example, I'm around 65 kilos, so you're looking at somewhere around 450 to 550 grams of carbs roughly. Now, depends how you are as a person and how you deal with that sort of eating process. I'm personally going to try and spread that out over a couple of days, purely because I think if I eat 550 grams of carbohydrates the day before the marathon, I'm going to feel like an absolute pudding come race day. But one tip I would say is trying to find carb-dense foods or drinks, so things that are high carb with low weight, if that makes sense. So for example, like a drink mix is quite high carb. Sweets can be a good option purely because they're high in carb but not too high in weight. You get the gist. But yeah, so I'm going to be trying to fuel with carbs, but I don't want to end up feeling stodgy and on race day, you know? Now, the next thing is quite a hot topic at the moment. It is Bicarb. Now, I've got two different brands here. You've got Morton, and you've also got Bicarb with an extra R, but I think they've changed their name to Flycarb. Now, we'll come back to which one I think is better in just a second, but essentially the reason why I take Bicarb in especially races is because when you perform at a high intensity, lactate is produced in the muscles. Now, lactate is actually a fuel source, despite people thinking it's a waste product. lactate is actually a fuel source that your body can reuse to basically fuel training. However, it's what the lactate does that negatively impacts your performance, because lactate, hence lactic acid, is acidic in nature. So if you start to produce too much lactate, then you're kind of recycling, then your muscle acidity goes up through the roof, and then that's when you kind of get the muscle fatigue kicking in. Now, the reason we take bicarb is because bicarb is alkaline in nature, so it helps to increase the pH of our blood back to that kind of neutral level, rather than the acidity of the lactate or the alkaline of the bicarb, so trying to bring it back kind of to that middle ground. So essentially, it's better if you're going to be doing things where you're going to produce high amounts of lactate, for example, middle distance running, but also things like if you're racing, for example, a bit similar to the creatine, if you're going to be doing things with short, sharp bursts, it's good to have kind of the lactate buffer to help maybe lessen the impact of that lactate, or potentially the marathon with the hills, maybe. My personal opinion is essentially the longer the distance gets, the risk benefit of taking bicarb changes, because bicarb has a high risk of GI distress or stomach upset. So you've certainly got to be careful with what you're taking it with, and also you've definitely got to experiment in training. Now, one question I get asked all the time is, which should I go for? Is bicarb from Maurten worth it, or should I go for the cheaper option? And now my honest opinion is that Maurten is that little bit better than other brands that I've tried, but it is also quite a lot more expensive. I think for the price of 4 Maurten, you can get kind of 15 of the fly carb. So if you're going to be using it quite frequently, I get the fly carb for training, but if it's going to be kind of like once for every peak race maybe, then maybe Maurten's worth it for you. But ultimately, I don't know if there's too much difference. The next thing I use as part of my pre-race nutrition, and then again, this depends on the race, I used this for my 5 and 10K PBs recently, is a broccoli shot. Now this is full of isothiocyanates, which come from broccoli sprouts, and essentially it works very similar to bicarb in terms of the idea is that it prevents that lactate buildup. It's kind of looking towards the shorter distances, but there's no reason why you couldn't use this in a half marathon or marathon. The one main benefit that I've been loving the Nomio broccoli shots for is because the risk of GI upset, despite it being broccoli sprouts, is a lot lower than the bicarb. So definitely, if you're thinking of both, maybe the broccoli shot is a better option for you. But again, try it. It tastes disgusting, but yeah, have some fun. Now, the final thing that I possibly would take before the marathon, and this is still up in the air, I haven't decided yet, is ketones. Now, ketones are extremely kind of popular in, say, like the Tour de France or extreme cycling. This essentially the sports where you're going to get towards that glycogen depletion, that glucose depletion. So the marathon is a little bit more useful, I guess. Now, ketones are a fuel source that the body naturally produces when it's ran out of carbohydrates. So typically when people go into this ketosis, or people that are doing the keto diet, they're going to be operating mostly on ketones, and essentially it's another fuel source for the body. The main difference between ketones and glucose is that ketones cross the blood-brain barrier, so people have noticed things like a lot better like focus or mental sharpness when they've taken ketones. I personally like to take this a little bit after runs as more of like a recovery hit rather than a pre-run thing, but I think its main kind of the main reason you would take it is before a run or before a race, just to give you that mental stimulation, but also give you that extra fuel source or that extra fuel pathway. So you haven't just got carbohydrates and fats as your pathway, you've also got kind of ketones as well. Yeah, quite a versatile energy option. I don't use these too much, but maybe once a week I have a little shot of ketones. What I would recommend is getting a flavoured one, because the normal one is disgusting. So get peach or apple, I would say. And yeah, again, experiment, see if it works for you. So moving on to during run nutrition, and this is where this big piece of cardboard comes in. I did kind of semi-steal this from Podium Festival a few weeks ago. Kind of not, they did give them out for free, but that's fine. Essentially what I've drawn here is a graph of London Marathon. So we've got the start and we've got the finish. All the blue dots along the bottom are water stations. The blue cups above are where I'm going to plan to grab water. And then we've got the non-caffeine gels above, and we've got the caffeine gels below. So as you can see here, I'm going to take a 30-gram carbohydrate gel at the start with 100 milligrams of caffeine, and then I'm going to alternate these for the first 3, but then transition to non-caffeine towards the end. Now the reason for that is because caffeine takes 45 minutes to kind of be absorbed properly and be utilised, I think. So in essence, if you're going to take caffeine down here, waste of time. So I'm going to be using caffeine here around kind of just past halfway to hopefully get me to the finish line. And yeah, so I'm looking at probably around 300 milligrams of caffeine during the run. Now, the typical recommendation for caffeine is kind of 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. So for example, I weigh just over 60 kilos, so you're looking at around 360 milligrams, for example. But obviously you need to experiment with this. You need to see how much is in things like your coffee or your tea before the race, because quite often I see people forgetting about the other things they have and just looking at the gels. But I personally find caffeine is an absolute game changer. So when it comes to race day, I'm gonna definitely be using gels with caffeine in. I'm gonna be using Precision Fuel and Hydration purely because I just prefer the taste to the Molten, to be honest. I think they're pretty similar in terms of their texture-ish. And then gel-wise, I'm gonna be planning on using about 90 to 120 grams of carbohydrate during the race. Now, your body has 60 to 90 minutes of glycogen stores anyway, so it's all about kind of front-loading that glycogen so that then when you do deplete in the second half of the race, that you're able to kind of counterbalance that with the exogenous or outside the body carbohydrate sources that you've taken on during the race. So in this situation, it's gonna be basically carb with caffeine, carb, no caffeine. Carb with caffeine, carb, no caffeine, so on and so forth, you get the picture. Essentially just to stop myself hitting the wall, which is that process of running out of glycogen or glucose. And then returning to the cardboard behind me, hydration. Now it's typically estimated that runners will lose between 1/2 litre to 2.5 litres of water during an hour of running. Now obviously that's a wide range. Again, I think I sit at the lower end of that, so my plan is to try and take on about 300 to 400 millilitres of water each hour. So that's probably 2 or 3 water stations. So as you can see, I'm stopping at around mile 4 for water, mile 8.5, mile 13.75, mile 19, so on and so forth. So just to basically try and keep myself on the edge of that kind of dehydration. But for me as a runner, I think gel and fueling is much higher priority than hydration. But again, you need to experiment in training, find out what works for you. One side note I would add with the caffeine is obviously it's well known as a diuretic in terms of it causes you to lose fluid, so that could lead to dehydration. However, the other thing that people don't realise is that it can also cause GI upset, so stomach upset. So if you are taking large amounts of caffeine, make sure you've practiced it first, because otherwise you're going to be spending an aggressive amount of time in Portaloos, which is not fun for you, and you will regret it. Now, moving on to post-run fueling. So there's only really kind of 2 or 3 things I use post-run. Now we've got my secret weapon, which I'm going to leave till last, my absolute favourite thing fuel-wise on this planet. And then you've got your kind of standard things. So I always kind of have like a protein shake straight after I run. So after most runs, I also take an amino acid complex. Now this is similar to like BCAAs, I think. Essentially, protein is made up of amino acids, so it's basically taking protein in a slightly easier form to digest. So this is more about just instant recovery or instant kind of refueling and recovering from the race or run. Literally add a scoop of this to water and drink it like any sort of like electrolyte drink, if you like. But yeah, just that extra little protein boost, and I'll normally have this accompanied with, or before or after, very occasionally mixed in because it's lemon flavored, but with a protein shake. So I'll sometimes have a protein shake and an amino complex just for that extra boost of protein. Just because if you've been out running for an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, your body's gonna need to repair and recharge. So yeah, just that little extra protein boost. Now, moving on to my secret weapon. This is probably the thing that's fueled 99% of my training recently, and a lot of you will already be able to guess what it is. So amazing that I've even made a little pyramid for you. Rice pudding, specifically the TESCOS variation. Now, I'm doing a lot of mileage at the moment. I'm doing about 200 kilometers per week, give or take. So when it comes to getting in from a run, one of the first things I do, probably before I have the protein shake or the amino acid complex, is I have a tin of rice pudding. Now, you're looking at probably around 400 calories for a tin. I'm not worried about the calorie intake. My main priority when it comes to getting in from these kind of harder training sessions or harder runs is carbs, protein, calcium, milk. Basically, it's got all the good stuff in it. It's got all the good shit. Now, I would say on average, I get through 2 to 3 tins of this per day. Depends on the training volume, obviously. But yeah, hate on me if you like. Tell me I've got a bad diet if you like. I don't care. Look at all those green marks on the label. So good. Now, as someone who has a massive sweet tooth, this is kind of multifaceted in terms of I'm getting that recovery, I'm getting that calcium, that protein, that carbs, but it also gives me a massive kind of sugar hit as well, which I love. I love desserts. I love rice pudding. This is the best thing. If you're gonna buy anything, buy this. So, just before we finish the video, I did ask my Instagram followers for some questions about nutrition that I'm going to quickly kind of breeze through now. I've only picked kind of the ones that I think are more common, the more nuanced ones I've kind of replied to personally. So there was a lot of questions about beetroot juice. Do I take it? When do I take it? Etc. And the answer is no, I do not take beetroot juice. The main reason is because beetroot juice, the main reason people take beetroot juice is for the nitrates, which cause this vasodilation, blood vessels expanding. Now, the effectiveness of nitrates as a vasodilator has been questioned when it comes to basically the better you get as an athlete or the more time you've spent training. Essentially, if you've already got a high level of capillarization and already got a good amount of blood vessels in your legs, how much difference is it going to make to kind of vasodilate them, if that makes sense? It's worth a go if you want to give it a try. I've used it in the past and have helped, and I have found it useful in the past, but it's not something I take now just because I already feel like I'm taking quite a lot. I don't want to add something else that could potentially upset my stomach. And if you gave me an option between the beetroot shot or the broccoli shot, I'm picking the broccoli shot every single time because I find that it's the lactate that seems to do me over, not the aerobic capacity, if that makes sense. Maybe that's contradictory, I don't know. Someone's asked, do you think collagen is useful to take? Now, I would say there are definitely some groups of people I would recommend collagen for. People that have kind of had a history of tendon problems, people that want to kind of look after their tendons and their skin, etc. Again, I would probably consult a nutritionist if you're going to start taking collagen. I don't personally take it. I haven't really had too many tendon injuries over the years. Just be careful which collagen you're taking because there's marine and bovine. As a runner, I don't think there's any point in taking the marine collagen. I would be looking more towards the bovine collagen. But yeah, definitely worth having a look. Someone else has asked, can you talk about weight gain as a runner and preventing disordered eating thoughts? And this kind of ties into another question where someone's put, do you ever feel guilty of eating too much or if scale weight goes up? Now, I've always been pretty open about my relationship with food when it comes to, well, my YouTube videos, and it's something that I've struggled with in the past and still struggle with to this day. Now, one thing I've definitely found useful to me is just not getting on the scales. If you don't get on the scales, you don't see the number, because quite often I'll look in the mirror and like what I see when it comes to my own body, but then the second I get on the scales, suddenly I'm like, oh, actually, I don't like that. And it's all because it's tied to a number. I could be absolutely shredded, but I've eaten 20 kilos of broccoli, so I've gained 20 kilos on the scales, or I could be absolutely shredded and have eaten 15 kilos of donuts, but my weight on the scales from the broccoli will be higher than the donuts. So that's where it kind of messed with my head, and I just found I was so much happier without the scales. Now, obviously there is a huge problem with kind of weight, body dysmorphia, racing quicker if you're leaner, etc. And obviously you could go into a whole video about this. Hang on, my mum's calling me. Hello. So it's obviously a topic that I could talk about in a lot of depth. I would say one thing that has helped me massively is being surrounded with people that have healthy relationships with food. I think you realise kind of how much things don't matter as much as you think they do, but ultimately speak to a professional is what I'd say. It's what helped me, and I'm very thankful that I had a partner who had a good relationship with food, and that seemed to really help me. So yeah, definitely it's a real tricky one. And then finally, do you eat your rice pudding hot or cold? Cold every time. Eat it straight out the tin, add things to it if you want. Nutella, raspberry jam, cherry jam and raisins is a favourite of mine. Biscoff, add whatever you like. Such a good vessel. I hope you have enjoyed this video. If you've got any more nutrition questions, drop them down below. I'll be happy to answer them. This is obviously just things that I've used that work for me. As I said, I'm not a nutritionist. I'll put a link to a nutritionist down below who I've heard good things about, but I've personally never had a nutritionist. I don't have one at the moment, and I don't plan on having one in the near future. If you do need to contact them, just do your research, speak to someone who knows what they're talking about, and yeah, practice makes perfect, I guess. So if you're going to use it on race day, use it in training. Anyway, thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next one.